The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous supporters. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/donate. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode number 77.
I'm a doctor. I've lived for over 2,000 years. I am Scottish. I can complain about things. Shush.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. Today we're discussing the 10th Doctor, David Tennant story, Idiot's Lantern. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
So this is the Idiot's Lantern, which is kind of a funny name. We'll talk about that in a second. It's from the first season of the 10th Doctor, David Tennant. It's the 7th episode of that season, and it's got Rose as his sole companion again, as opposed to when we had Mickey tagging along for a bit. And this one is written by Mark Gatiss, who we know is a longtime collaborator with who eventually be Stephen Moffat will eventually be the showrunner, and has written a number of episodes for Doctor Who, some better than others. But this one written by Mark Gatiss, and it aired in May of 2006. So this is, as we record this, about 12 years ago, which still baffles me that these things have so much time has passed.
Exactly.
So the Idiot's Lantern, which refers to
Television.
I find it a bit ironic that they would, basically they're calling the people watching the show idiots.
Well, I don't think they're doing that, but
how many nicknames do we have for television? Idiot box and boob tube and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, which is funny. Well, also funny that boob tube doesn't work anymore because it's not a tube. It's usually now a flat panel. But yes, but it's sort of I think it's playing fun with the pejorative idea that, which is with the premise of this story, which is that TV will melt your brain. Yeah, it's sort of been the long time complaint. If you watch too much TV, it'll melt your brain. You'll turn into an idiot.
I don't know. Watch it
in the classic sense.
I'm sorry, this is my little commentary, but looking at some people who watch, like cable news or whatever, there might be some accuracy to that, but that's beside the point.
I guess one thing to mention is this is not an established phrase, Idiot's Lantern. It apparently came from not Mark Gatiss, but one of the other writers of the show's dad referred to TV as the Idiot's Lantern, and so they picked it up from there and used it. Something about Mark Gatiss that I've seen pointed out is that his scripts frequently focus on nostalgia. And I think that's fair. He, like his most recent one, if I recall correctly, was the Ice Queen of Mars episode, where you have these 19th century British imperialists on Mars and stuff. Another one he did was, I forget the title of it, but it was another one set like in industrial age Britain, and had little red monsters running around and stuff. He also did Robot of Sherwood, if I recall correctly. Yep. So there is kind of a nostalgia past theme running through a lot of his stuff. And I think that's on display here because we go back to the 1950s to see the coronation of Queen Elizabeth and what British society is like at the time. And there is, even though he does have some very sharp and unsympathetic things in that timeline, in this episode, there is also a kind of nostalgia feel as well. In fact, as soon as the Doctor and Rose get off the TARDIS, we have Elvis nostalgia and things that are on display. My sense, though, I was looking briefly at the ratings for this one, and in the ratings and reviews, it looked like it was at the time fairly popular. But I know I've seen significant criticism of this episode in the fan community subsequently because of the villain, The Wire, and the kind of incessant hunger, feed me kind of
that
thing.
Was so tedious.
Well, my thought when I heard that was Little Shop of Horrors. Feed me, Seymour. Feed me.
Yeah.
You just can't use feed me without thinking Little Shop of Horrors.
Right. Well,
I did think it was interesting, ironic that they would, and I thought this worked early on in the episode. I think the problems with the episode emerged as it went on. Mm-hmm. But early in the episode, I think the Elvis nostalgia is nice. Driving around on the motorcycle is fun.
Moped, yep.
The moped is fun, yeah. The irony of, the grandma talking about how television is going to rot your brains, which then is what happens to her and everyone else. So we have this, cultural fear made manifest in a Doctor Who episode. That is literally going to happen here. People's brains stop working after The Wire does its thing with them.
Mm-hmm.
Did this happen very much?
I thought that was neat.
I'm sorry. Did this happen very much in Classic Who? Did they do this idea of take a cultural fear and make and play it real? Because I know this was a feature of quite often of the X-Files. Mm-hmm. To take another show that sort of sometimes dealt with similar things, where you would take this, urban legends or some of these, old wives' tales, and they would then show them as, oh, they're true. And
well,
and I was wondering if
they do something like that frequently in Classic Who. I mean, I'd have to think about whether they do it exactly this way, but I know they do something like it with cultural fears, and right from the beginning, because that's what the Daleks are. That plays directly out of our fears of nuclear war during the Cold War, and also the Nazis. And there are other later things. There's some John Pertwee stuff that's clearly responding to like coal miners' strikes that were happening, or computers taking over the world, or, fascist coups, or all kinds of things like that. What I don't know that they did is take small, trivial domestic fears and gave them concrete, monstrous form. But they would take at least broad cultural fears and do that.
Well, I think that was a nature of the format, because of course Classic Who, they had much longer serials than we have in New Who. We were just talking about that before. Basically, 2 episodes of Classic Who equals 1 episode of Modern Who. Well, most serials were a minimum of 4. Yeah, episodes. There are some 2. There's some 2-parters, but there's 4 to 6, even up 8 and 10. So they had much longer episodes to deal with.
Right. So each story was effectively an equivalent of a 2 or 3-parter for us.
Correct. So they would deal with much broader
for us today.
Material. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, but the interesting thing is they're what they're dealing with here is they're at really the moment that the Doctor and Rose drop into is sort of, especially I think in British culture, the advent of television as a cultural phenomenon. Because what it is it's the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, which is the first televised coronation.
Correct.
And the first opportunity for basically the entire British Commonwealth to watch this live together. And I think for many people of a certain age, this would have been a common memory, a common connection, especially given that we haven't had a coronation in Britain since.
Yeah, it's literally the only televised coronation.
Right,
so far.
Exactly, in Britain, yes. And so I think that was kind of a brilliant idea, was to take this story to that moment and build it around that. I noticed in the design of this episode, the colors were bright, the skies were blue, and the Doctor himself talks about that this moment in time is, post World War II, rationing has ended, people are excited and joyful, and this was a golden age in Churchillian England of the time.
Well, they've shaken off the effects of the war. The war, that the war was literally, at this point, it would have been 8 years in the past. Most of Britain was rebuilt. People were prosperous. It was doing very, very well.
And now we had a young vibrant queen who symbolized a new age for Britain. And so you have a very hopeful, joyful, prosperous sort of time. And then we enter into it with this creature, and we can talk about the creature in a second, but
we should mention this wasn't, even though, and they mention how very few people in real history had televisions at this time, so they'd gather in people's houses to watch the coronation. So it was still, TV was still uncommon, but it wasn't brand new in England. They had it at least as far back as the 1930s. In fact, The Wire, the character, the woman who plays The Wire, the female image, is patterned off of an actual female television presenter from British television from the 1930s who had a children's show, and she would begin each children's show by saying, "Are you seated comfortably? Then I'll begin." And they quote that and just tweak it, "Then we'll begin." In The Wire's dialogue.
And there's actually a connection to the original broadcast of the BBC. That tower is at Alexandra Palace, which was, and to this day still is, a broadcast site for the BBC. It's still one of their transmission towers, but it was their original studios, and their original studios still exist. And I think that's what they filmed in, where they show them in the studio itself, or the control room of the studio was the original studios of the BBC when they first put up television.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I had to look up Alexandra Palace because it's another one of those British references that you have to be British or familiar with British culture to understand. And it's not an actual palace as we think of palaces, but it's a venue. It's a location for. It's
actually more like
it's a studio.
Sport. Well, it was, as I looked it up, it was kind of like originally designed like a sports and variety show type arena more than, and they added more onto it. And that's where the BBC ended up setting up shop for the television's broadcast at first, before they moved to downtown London where they are now. Right.
It pre-existed TV and was an entertainment and sports complex before that.
Yep.
So the other element that I'd like to remember in the beginning is the sort of it's the store, the TV store where the Wire character shows up, is Magpie Electronics. And as we've noticed very often, the name Magpie Electronics will show up in a lot of places in the future TV shows. And apparently this company becomes a very big company that creates electronics in spaceships for hundreds of years from now, and that sort of thing. So Mr. Magpie is not ruined, apparently, by this. Although he dies.
He does get disintegrated. I guess he has some heirs or something, or whoever buys the business keeps the name.
Right, exactly. I would point out the little Easter egg of the name Magpie Electronics. Keep your eyes out for that going forward. So the story is, this Mr. Magpie is struggling. To keep his business open. And this night, during a stormy night, a bolt of red lightning hits the TV aerial and downloads this creature that calls itself the Wire into a TV set. And to say it's later on, we learn that it's a creature, an alien creature, trying to regain corporeal form after it was executed by its own kind. And it's doing this by absorbing the mental energy of people through television sets,
which also deprives them of their faces.
Yes,
for reasons.
I was going to say for reasons of dramatic effect. It blanks. They're literally blank faces.
I suppose it's a lot easier than having the actors try to stand there and look, unblinking, dumb.
I like the concept. The facelessness concept, I think, is in effective body horror. However, the CGI that they use to do it really isn't quite there. But, I can forgive the special effects in Old Who, so I can certainly forgive the special effects in 2006.
I have to admit, I thought it was just bad makeup.
Well, afterward, the prosthetic,
Well, there is one that's prosthetic, but then when they like do Rose's face, it seemed pretty clear to me that was CGI.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of odd.
I also thought it was effective later on in the episode when the Doctor uses the sonic screwdriver on the TVs in the sale models in Magpie's shop, and all of the stolen faces are revealed trying to talk silently on the screens of those TVs. I thought that was nice and creepy too.
Right.
By the way, this is not the only, so when the wire absorbs somebody's face, like lightning bolts come out of the TV and suck your face into it. And that's definitely CGI. And I've seen similar things on other shows. There's an episode of Fringe called The No-Brainer, where a energy hand comes out of computer screens and grabs people's faces and literally melts their brains. So this is not, and it like oozes out your ears. And so this is not the only time this trope has been played with recently in modern television.
Well, in fact, if you go back to the Star Trek, the original series, remember the episode was it Charlie?
Charlie X.
Charlie X, who had superhuman powers, godlike powers, and when people made him mad, he took their faces away, made them blank faced.
Yeah, at least in one case, they were laughing at him, and around a corner, we don't see the people, we just hear them laughing.
Yes.
And Charlie gets mad and yells at them to stop laughing, and then we see this woman creeping around the edge of the corner blindly with no face, and they just put a stocking over her head to achieve that effect.
That was, as a child, that was quite traumatic. And then I just watched an episode of Star Trek Voyager, the 7th season, where the son of Q shows up and takes away Neelix's, not his whole face, but
just his mouth.
His mouth, because of his incessant talking.
That's definitely an improvement,
Granted.
So but there seems to be this concept, like you say, this sort of built-in like horror idea in us at the idea of having your face removed and your eyes and your nose and your mouth closed up.
And that's actual. And not only would that be very bad for you, you couldn't breathe, eat, or see. Yeah. And they're kind of worried about how are these people going to eat. There's a more immediate problem. How are they going to breathe?
Exactly. How are these people breathing?
But there's also a special reason why that's horrific to us, because humans communicate huge amounts of information by our facial expressions.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And therefore, our brains are uniquely tuned to identify and process faces. And just from they've shown that within hours after birth, babies are already locking onto and analyzing faces in a way they don't analyze other objects. Mm-hmm. And so there's an innate horror for us as a species to imagine a person that's just not transmitting any of that information to us, and they're just a blank in this thing we rely on for information constantly subconsciously processing.
Yeah, just as a behind the scenes, that's one of the reasons why, although this is an audio podcast, we always record using Skype so that we can see each other's facial expressions.
And that's why podcasts are so terrifying.
Exactly.
So then the Doctor and Rose show up on the scene, and once again they're trying to go a place and end up someplace that they didn't expect. The TARDIS takes them where they need to be rather than where they want to be, and they're trying to get to 1953, but they're trying to get to the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York City to see Elvis Presley.
They're trying to get a few years later in the 50s. And in America, but they hit 53 Britain because that's where they need to be.
Oh, okay, right, okay, and Rose is all decked out in pink. And is
poodle skirt kind of. It's kind of like a poodle skirt. I don't think it has a poodle on it though.
I heard it referred to their get-ups, like the doctor's, got his big poofy hairdo going here. I heard it referred to as Maude, like full Maude.
Oh, yeah.
What does that refer to?
Maude is a British subculture and fashion style that was popular, I know, in the early 60s. I think it lasted into the 70s. And I guess by this episode would imply it was in the 50s. It's short for modern. Okay. And it was a kind of youth modern style.
Okay. And then there is a reference, Rose references that she knows all the lingo because her mom watched Cliff Richard's movies every bank holiday Monday. And Cliff Richard's, of course, very famous British singer and actor. I looked it up. He had the third biggest sales of singles on the UK singles chart behind the Beatles and Elvis.
What's funny?
Cliff Richard. I mentally processed that as Keith Richard. I was going, he has movies?
What's so funny, though, with Cliff Richard is he was huge in the UK. I mean, he was the Elvis of the UK. I think he had one top 10 hit here in the United States, and that was like in 1980, 1981.
Right. It's
like towards the end of his career. Yeah. Towards the end of his career.
Yeah. He didn't come over in the British, like with all the other British groups that came in the British invasion. For some reason, Cliff Richard just didn't catch on.
By the way, just kind of jump back real quick. Elvis Presley was first on the Ed Sullivan Show September 9th, 1956. So the TARDIS missed it by 3 years.
56. Okay. Yeah.
The Cliff Richard thing is kind of interesting because you can't have huge celebrities in one country that don't translate into another. A famous example of that, of someone who actually, I guess, was American and then became big in England, but was unknown in America, was Slim Whitman. And then in, I guess, the 80s, when they were trying to promote him here in America, they'd have these commercials saying he sold millions of records in England. Yeah. And nobody in America had heard of him. He was kind of a comic figure, this like country yodeler guy.
Yes, I remember.
Nobody here had ever heard of him.
Yes.
Or Boxcar Willie.
Or who's the guy with the pan flute?
Yeah, I remember him.
Okay, so and then we are the other sort of, so we have Magpie as one part of this story, the ongoing part. We have the Doctor and Rose, of course, and then we have this other group of characters, which is
the Connolly family.
The Connolly family on Florizel Street, and what we have is the grandma, the dad, Eddie, the mom,
and the son Tommy.
I forget the mom's name, Mrs. Connolly. Well, I'll just call her Mrs. Connolly. And
I don't know if they give her a name.
I think
Mrs. Connolly.
They should.
She actually does get a name, but
Rita.
Rita. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Eddie, Rita, and Tommy, and Grandma.
And just Grandma. That's all she's known as.
Eddie is like the biggest jerk out there. Okay.
Yeah, and this is where the episode really starts to go south for me.
Same here.
Because now, of course, there were jerks who intimidated their families in the 1950s, and there are today, and there always have been. And it's fair for fiction, whether on TV or in a novel, to show us that. That's fine. But in the way it's handled here is just very ham-fisted. Mr. Connolly is just an irredeemable jerk. Yeah. And he's a bully. He bullies everybody in his family. He's implied to be he's sadistic towards everybody in his family. He's unsympathetic in just about every way possible. And he's specifically
he's a misogynist.
Yeah. He's a misogynist, but he's specifically handled in a way that gets into modern political correctness sensitivities in a way that really rubs it in your face. The doctor is, when the doctor and Rose show up in their household, the doctor basically orders this guy to start doing what he, Mr. Connolly, considers women's work as a way of humiliating him. And
Rose, if you want to kind of understand the character, he really is Jackie Gleason's character in The Honeymooners ramped up to 11.
Right. Yeah, and not played for comedy.
Not played for comedy.
And then Rose starts, doing judgy gender politics with him, too, and is like humiliating him with her knowledge of the Union Jack and how it's really only called the Union Jack when it's flown at sea. Otherwise, it's the Union flag. And then later on, she's like, only an idiot would hang the Union flag upside down, which is just a deliberate bit of snark because it's a vertically symmetrical flag. You can't hang it upside down. And it's just snarkiness and meanness on the part of our main characters to someone who is being beaten up for expressing ideas that were common in his time and is being depicted in the most unsympathetic manner as he expresses those ideas. Really, if you were a time traveler and you wanted to experience all of these adventures in time, there's a certain element of I'm going to have to partition my own views as I travel. So it's like you don't want to be the ugly American traveling abroad and looking down on other people in other countries. You also don't want to be the ugly time traveler. Right. Doing the same thing.
Stop judging people based on your own standards, your own history.
Yeah, I mean, you have to recognize I may not agree with this, but this is the way things are right now, and I can't let that stop me from interacting with these people and doing what I can to help them. If I just come across as a jerk from another time, that's not ultimately going to serve them. There's a neat moment in a Doctor Who novel by Stephen Baxter called The Wheel of Ice, and it's a second Doctor story set in the late 21st century near the time of the second Doctor's companion, Zoe. And when Zoe encounters some stuff in this novel that she views negatively and is slightly before her time, she has a negative reaction, and the Doctor steps in to remind her, we're not here to judge these people, Zoe. And really, that's the attitude a time traveler would have to take if you're going to be a successful time tourist and time traveler and general helper-outer in other times.
Even in New Who, they do that when they travel forward in time. The Doctor often admonishes his companion to not judge the future cultures based on their own old ideas. But it's rarely is it flipped over. Although, depending on how far back in time they go, sometimes he does.
True, but especially for recent stuff, like we're expected to accept Captain Jack's 51st century sexual mores, but not this 1950s guys.
Right, exactly. And in fact, what they give us is Eddie has this this bad habit of, when he's yelling at people and they try to defend themselves, he yells at them, "I am talking now."
Which is his way of getting them to shut up. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And then he tries to do it on the Doctor, and then the Doctor shuts him down, and we're supposed to cheer because the Doctor's giving this guy what for. I mean, it does feel satisfying, like this bully's being shut down, but they never should have made Eddie into the bully that he is. It's just not right.
Well, they really put no redeemable value to him at all. There's absolutely nothing there that makes you want to say, okay, this guy is a flawed human being. He's got real problems that he needs to work on.
He's even an informant.
He's just, there is absolutely nothing in this character. Now, I know we've talked about it before, but I think like with some of Mark Gaddis's episodes, we've noticed that he really doesn't like parents.
Yeah. Here we get one sort of likable parent. Yes. And that's the mom, because she eventually stands up for herself. But even she, before that, she's just this miserable figure.
Yeah. Right.
And she's not, it's hard to find her. I guess we're supposed to like her, but it's a little hard to because she never does anything particularly likable. She just cowers.
Well,
and
except
then kicks
for when
the guy out.
Yeah, she throws that. Yeah, and I can't cheer that. I mean, because there's no evidence he was actually like physically abusive. I mean, he was obviously emotionally abusive, and I don't cheer the breaking up of a family. I don't feel good about it. The one redeeming part of all of this is at the very end when the doctor and Rose encourage Tommy to chase after his dad.
Where Rose encourages Tommy.
It wasn't the doctor.
His dad.
It wasn't.
Yeah,
no,
the doctor
you're right.
even looks cool towards the idea.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Where Rose, who has lost a father, as we know, several times, in fact, she encourages him. It's, whatever he's done, he's still your dad. And that's the only redeeming part of that. And I have to wonder whether that was added maybe by Russell T Davies or someone else to the end of this episode, or maybe the BBC, executive somewhere said, no, we can't leave it where we're breaking up a family in this family show, Doctor Who. We have to have something positive.
Yeah, that could be. Also, another aspect that goes, and this happens just on the level of dialogue really quickly. So it's easy to miss this. They don't play it a bunch, but the implication is that Tommy is gay. And because at one point when everyone's sitting around the TV to watch the coronation, Tommy starts talking about his grandmother in a way that's just designed to get his dad to jump on him. And because there are other people there, Mr. Connolly doesn't totally land on Tommy rhetorically feet first. Instead, he said, oh, he loves his grandmother, this one, and his mother. He's a real, and someone, either Mr. Connolly or the visiting neighbor lady, says he's a real mama's boy. And then the neighbor lady says that you'll have to beat that out of him. And so the implication is Tommy is gay or may become gay, and
they ramp that up a little bit more when Tommy is laying into his dad outside the door and says, you fought so we can love whoever we want.
Right.
And that's such a clear catchphrase, at least in our culture today, of homosexuality, of being able to love some of the same sex.
It's hard to imagine that Tommy meant that as so that Gentiles can love Jews, which is the thing that would have been at issue in Nazi Germany.
Right. Or cross-racial relationships.
Interesting. Yeah. So I didn't get it from the, being the mama's boy. I mean, that idea, because I'm from Boston, I say idea. The idea of Tommy being a mama's boy and that needs to be beat out of him. I wouldn't necessarily have that alone being a code word for homosexuality. I mean, there was this idea. Eddie is obviously being portrayed as Mr. Macho, and so a macho dad would never let his boy become a mama's boy. But it is that line where Tommy finally confronts the dad outside the house, where he says, you fought against fascism. Remember, people telling you how to live, who you could be friends with, who you could fall in love with. Now, that could be that could be taken in different ways.
Right.
But
there's plausible deniability here. Yeah. But I think we're meant to understand this. And I also think there's an autobiographical element here because Mark Gatiss happens to be gay.
Right.
And I think he's trying to speak to the experience of gay people in the 1950s. Growing up, what that would have been like. And there's an element of verisimilitude here also, because apparently male homosexuality is positively correlated with absent and distant fathers. And Mr. Connolly is very definitely an emotionally distant father.
Yep.
Right. This is true. Right. I mean, I don't know anything about Mark Gattis's biography, his childhood, but maybe he's working something out here in this, unfortunately. I mean, again, I like a lot of what Mark Gatiss has done, but
especially on Sherlock. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like the way he treats parents, as we've talked. And this is an example of that. So I think we finally assembled our major cast. There's a few supporting characters here, the policeman and that sort of thing. But so the idea is Magpie has now been forced by The Wire to sell TVs at a ridiculous price of £5. You know, you're selling TVs for basically nothing. So everybody has one. And Rose notices the historical inaccuracy. Her mom telling her that, no, people had to get, like you said, the TVs were rare as hen's teeth. People gathered in living rooms to watch it. And so, and then
by the way, the TV aerials in this neighborhood are deliberately shaped to look like swastikas.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that. Yeah, there was that idea of the swastika in that, and in fact, and then we also have the police coming and taking these people away, shrouded under blankets, and the doctor gets clocked.
Gotta watch that right hook.
Yeah, but and then chases them. I noticed they did a pretty good job in this the sets for this in trying to only stick to sets and outdoor scenes where you couldn't see modern London. But there was that one street where the police car went behind the market stall and through the gate to hide, with that very conveniently parked moving truck that never moved but blocked the street for days at a time on the street. But
there are also a few slips, like when the doctor builds his anti-wire device, he uses a kind of electronic board that wasn't invented till the 1970s.
Well, so that brings up something else. So, at the end, we're kind of skipping around here. At the end, he traps the creature of the wire on a Betamax tape, which is, funny. Oh, Betamax. Where did the Betamax come from?
How did he even build a Betamax tape in 1953? The raw
he got it from the TARDIS. He got it from the TARDIS.
That's. I think we're supposed to.
They went into the TARDIS and got some. There's one more component he needed, and it was probably the Betamax tape and the carrier for it.
Okay.
I can accept that, but there's a bunch of stuff that goes by really fast in this that I think they needed to establish better, including how Tommy saves the day. Because the doctor is up on the transmitter tower and he's got the anti-wire device and he's connected back to Tommy in the control room via a wire. And then something happens. And it goes by so fast, I missed it. But I knew something had happened. And then all of a sudden, Tommy is fixing things.
Yeah.
It's like, how is this happening? And I had to go check online, and it was, a fuse blew. And Tommy knew enough to fix a fuse.
He found the matching fuse.
Or tube. That's a tube.
It was a vacuum tube.
Okay. Yeah. And that I could accept, but I think they should have given us a little bit of dialogue to make it clearer. Tommy is not inventing super science out of 20th century tubes. He's just replacing something.
Right.
And the funny part is they could have added to that scene, where's the tube? I need to replace, where's the tube? It blew. I need a new one. Something like that.
Right.
Just where he's talking to himself saying, where is it?
Yeah. Oh, this tube blew. I better replace it. Something like that.
Yeah, another plot point that kind of bugged me, jumping backwards in time, was Rose's decision to confront Magpie alone. It just now, I think this is intentional as opposed to a plot hole, which is like a lot of the companions in New Who. They eventually get more and more. They forget that they're the companion and not the doctor, right? And so she confronts Magpie and ends up getting. Sucked.
You're just asking to have your face sucked at that point.
Exactly.
I think that actually played well because, she kind of went off on her own, I got to go take care of this. I got to go confront the guy. And as soon as he locked the door, you see the look on her face like, this was not thought out well. This was not a good idea.
Right.
So I thought they actually played that well as, she's kind of feeling her oats. She's like, I could go take care of this. I could go talk to the guy. It's not a big deal. Oh, wait.
Yes.
Yeah, the scene that precedes that tells her to go to Magpie's store is when she sees the red lightning crackling around the Connolly's television set. And she goes and sees the Magpie label on the back of it. And I thought, actually, approaching a television crackling with unknown forms of energy and touching it and moving it around is already not well thought out.
Yes.
Yeah, it had a wood case. It's fine.
But again, I think it's that, the doctor would,
Yeah.
One of the things I talked about before was the doctor's, before we started recording, the doctor in New Who, his propensity to lick things to determine what they are and what they're made of. That's just a bad idea. Go around just to lick strange things.
Yeah, I like how he does when he licks the casing of the Wire's device. It's Bakelite. I kind of early plastic thing.
Yep. Yeah, I admit I would love to have a portable TV that looks like that. That's such a cool looking little device.
I like how Detective Inspector Bishop is marveling at things that we take for granted today, like a portable television. It's so amazing. Color television. Who could imagine that?
Yeah. So actually, a fun moment with Inspector Bishop was when he first gets the doctor. The doctor has found their secret office, and he's interrogating the doctor, and he says, "Tell me everything you know." And the doctor replies, "I know you can't wrap your hand around your elbow and make your fingers meet," which is funny.
I immediately verified that. Yeah,
the guy in the background grabs his arm surreptitiously. And he's like, "Hey, that's true." That was a great moment.
I like how when the doctor refers to Detective Inspector Bishop by his name, and Bishop is like, "How did you know that?" Well, it's written inside your collar, and he tightens his tie, and the doctor.
That was a cleverly done scene, not just because of the comedy, but because it changed from the doctor being interrogated to all of a sudden now the detective inspector is being interrogated. And the doctor even says, "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you know."
Yes, he ends the conversation that way. Right.
I think that was very clever the way the focus shifted from Bishop to the doctor.
Yeah.
Yes. It just twisted. That was very cleverly done, I think.
Yes.
They do similar things, particularly with the second doctor, where he will be so unassuming and subvert authority in a way that eventually puts him in charge of the situation. And that's what we have happening here. But he does it in this unassuming way that you don't even notice. He doesn't say, "Respect my authority." He works with the situation and gets the upper hand without the people in authority almost even noticing.
There's a note in the TARDIS Wikia that says that this is one of the earliest instances where the 10th Doctor displays a ruthless and overpowering personality when his patience and mercy are pushed to the boundaries. We see this happen with more and more frequency going forward, and especially with the 11th and 12th Doctors.
But really, who it's directed to is Mr. Connolly.
Right.
He is more accepting or whatever of the Wire, of the villain. But he just totally snaps and hauls off and starts yelling at Mr. Connolly in a way he wouldn't anybody else in this story. I
would say he's also the same way with Mr. Magpie. That, Mr. Magpie, who is also a bit of a victim of the Wire.
He's a victim. He's being tortured by the Wire actively as the story progresses. In turn, he talks about it like he's burning inside. It's burning behind his eyes and his head.
Right. And the Doctor doesn't have a lot of sympathy for him. There's not a lot of mercy for him, especially after Rose has been, had her face sucked off. That there isn't a lot of sympathy for him either in this, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a flaw, though, in the way they portray Magpie, because even though they tell us he's being tortured, he doesn't act like he's being tortured most of the time. He's not clawing at his head or wincing in agony all the time. He does come off more as a collaborator than as a victim.
Right. We talked about the faces and minds being sucked into the TV sets, and the Doctor, using the sonic screwdriver to show them.
And then they're all miraculously restored as soon as the Wire is gone, because reasons.
Yep, exactly.
Right. That's a bit of a hand wave moment.
So the Wire didn't just telepathically eat people's brains and faces. When the Wire got stored on Betamax, she also telepathically vomited them all back.
Right.
Basically. Again, they could have answered that with having like one last burst of lightning, and all of a sudden they're restored.
Or something.
They could have done something to show it happening, but they just all of a sudden, it's fixed now. No one actually died except Magpie.
Right.
So I think that's all I have. There's a few notes that I've kind of found in various places online talking about this episode. Apparently, this was supposed to be, Mark Gatiss says this was supposed to be an episode for the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, and that Tommy was, I think, sort of supporting what we were saying earlier. Tommy was supposed to have a crush on the Doctor.
Oh,
and
I'm glad
Rose
they didn't
would
go there.
Right, and Rose would think that he was interested in her, and there'd be this conversation, that would this funny. I'll make it. Here's a '70s reference: Three's Company moment where everyone thinks that a different thing is going on than it really is. And I'm trying to think of anything else that anything else interesting. Any other notes that you guys have on this?
The only other thing I have is that just as an example of how badly written and unsympathetic Mr. Connolly is, there's a moment where after it's been revealed that he's the one that turned in Granny, which is itself hard to believe.
Right.
But even after that's been revealed, he's justifying it to his wife. And he's saying she was a filthy, disgusting thing.
Right.
Which is, it's like, come on, who has this low a level of human compassion that this woman who's had her face sucked off, to you, she's a filthy, disgusting thing? Really? And then the Mrs. Connolly's reply is, she was my mother. And that exchange comes off as completely unbelievable and is just in the service of making Connolly look bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the myths about this episode, one of the misunderstandings about this episode is that people like to try to say it's a mistake, but it's not. Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne on the death of her father in 1952. But the official coronation ceremony took place 18 months later. So she was already the queen, but they didn't have the ceremony until 18 months later, which is why they keep referring to her as the queen before the ceremony.
Kind of the difference between having a store open and having its grand opening.
Correct.
Yes, exactly. And then
if the queen were a store. No offense to our friends across the pond.
Yes, the queen soft opening.
Just relating it to our experience, we don't have monarchs here.
Yes. Here's a little bit of trivia: is the actress who plays Grandma, who had previously appeared in Fury from the Deep in 1968.
Oh, wow!
And therefore holds the record for greatest span of time between guest appearances on Doctor Who. 38 years. So just a little bit of trivia.
Interesting.
Fun bits. Always good to mine the depths of the TARDIS wiki pages about the episodes.
Fury from the Deep was, unfortunately, much of it is lost, but it was one of the early episodes that got Doctor Who kind of on the censor's radar as being too scary for kids. There's a famous clip, which does survive, of these two guys like with wide eyes and open gaping mouths breathing poison into a room, like a poison gas. And so if you ever see this clip of these guys with this just open-eyed, open mouth horror thing happening, that's from Fury in the Deep.
Oh, wow. And that was the second Doctor?
Second Doctor, yeah.
Okay. Great. So unless you guys have any other notes, I'll bring it to a close and just say that's it from us on the Idiot's Lantern. What do you listeners think of this episode? We miss anything? Do you have any comments on any of the things we've discussed? Any of the notes about Eddie or any of the other elements of the story? What do you think? Did you like it? Do you not like it? Let us know, because we want to get some feedback from y'all. Visit us at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page. Leave some feedback there, or send us an email to drwho@sqpn.com. You could send us written remarks, or if you want to record something, maybe using the voice memo function on your phone, send us that along. We'd play it during the show. You can find links to all our personal social media and websites on our show notes on sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the first Doctor story, the William Hartnell story, The Keys of Marinus. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Doctor Who.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Always a pleasure, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening, and remember, hungry, feed me.
When will I see you again?
Soon, I expect. Or later. One of those.